The sprawling chamber of the Galactic Concord's High Council buzzed with the usual hum of interspecies diplomacy. Its vaulted ceiling shimmered with holographic projections of serene star fields, a facade of unity belied by the cold undercurrent of politics. Seated in the smallest, least ornamented section of the circular assembly was Ambassador Linnea Voss, humanity's lone representative. She sat with a calm exterior, her fingers lightly intertwined on the table, though the tension in her shoulders betrayed the storm within. Across the chamber, representatives of the dominant species exchanged glances of condescension. The Durakian envoy, with his three eyes set deep in a leathery, scaled face, leaned toward the Veshan delegate, his words a low growl but loud enough for Linnea to catch. Humans, always pleading, always posturing. Why do we continue humoring them? The Veshan, her translucent wings twitching in amusement, replied, "It's charming, in a way. Like a hatchling demanding a seat at the adult's table." Linnea did not flinch. She had long mastered the art of absorbing insults without reaction, an unfortunate necessity in her role. Her focus remained on the central dais, where Supreme Arbiter Corval, a towering figure with a bioluminescent crest, prepared to deliver the Council's decision on the matter she had spent months lobbying for: reparations for the massacre at Rendaria 4. The attack on the human colony had been swift, brutal, and, by all evidence, premeditated. Thousands dead, the settlement reduced to rubble. And yet, the perpetrators, a rogue faction tied to the Micron hegemony, faced no repercussions. Linnea's voice had been steady but impassioned in previous sessions, presenting irrefutable evidence, pleading for justice. She knew humanity was seen as a fledgling species, a recent addition to the interstellar fold. But the blatant dismissal of their suffering was becoming intolerable. Corval's crest dimmed slightly, a sign of weariness or perhaps indifference. After much deliberation, the Council has determined that punitive action against the Micron hegemony is unwarranted at this time. The evidence provided, while compelling, does not justify intervention. We advise the Terran Confederation to seek diplomatic avenues for resolution. Linnea's jaw tightened, but she remained composed. Diplomatic avenues? She echoed, her voice carrying through the chamber with surprising clarity. Thousands of my people are dead. Entire families erased. What diplomatic avenues would you recommend, Arbiter, when the perpetrators laugh at our appeals? Corval's gaze swept over her, unreadable. Humanity has always prided itself on resilience. Surely, you can weather this storm as you have others. The Council sees no merit in escalating tensions. The chamber rippled with murmurs. Some delegates avoided Linnea's gaze, while others smirked openly. The Durakian envoy leaned back, his expression triumphant. Linnea knew what they saw when they looked at her. A representative of a species that had clawed its way into the interstellar community after centuries of isolation. Resourceful, yes. Persistent, certainly. But to them, humans were unremarkable, a species that adapted instead of innovated, endured rather than conquered. Linnea rose, her movements measured. Resilience is not an invitation for exploitation, Arbiter, nor is patience an endless resource. The room fell silent, her words carrying a weight that seemed to press against the walls. For a brief moment, the ever-present hum of the chamber faded, replaced by an uneasy stillness. Linnea held their gazes, one by one, her brown eyes sharp as steel. She did not yell. She did not plead. Yet her presence commanded attention in a way that made the other delegates shift uncomfortably. Corval broke the silence, his tone dismissive. The Council has spoken, Ambassador. This matter is closed. Linnea inclined her head slightly, a gesture that could have been mistaken for submission. Without another word, she turned and exited the chamber, her steps echoing against the polished floor. Outside, the corridors stretched endlessly, a sterile path lined with holographic banners proclaiming unity and peace. She walked briskly, her fists clenched at her sides. Ambassador, a voice called. Linnea paused, glancing over her shoulder. It was Commander Elias Carter, her security escort, and one of the few humans allowed on the Concorde's central station. His imposing frame was at odds with his calm demeanor, though today even he seemed unsettled. "They denied it?" he asked, though the answer was already clear in her expression. "They denied it," she confirmed, her voice quieter now. "Dismissed it as though our dead were a trivial inconvenience." Carter swore under his breath, his usual restraint cracking. "They'll regret this." Linnea exhaled slowly, her composure faltering for the first time. "Not yet, they won't. They still believe we'll swallow every insult, endure every slight. That's been our way, hasn't it? Patience, diplomacy, the long game. And if the long game isn't enough?" She looked at him, something fierce flickering in her gaze. "Then we remind them what happens when patience runs out." Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. The Council's ruling was met with outrage, protests erupting in every major city. Yet beneath the surface, something deeper stirred, a collective realization that humanity could no longer afford to wait for respect to be granted. It had to be earned or taken. Linnea stood before the Terran Assembly, her speech broadcast to billions. "For too long, we have bent under the weight of interstellar arrogance, trusting that reason and diplomacy would prevail. Today, we see the truth. Reason is ignored and diplomacy is mocked. If we want justice, if we want peace, we must stand together, not as supplicants, but as equals." The roar of approval was deafening, and Linnea felt the shift in the air. This was no longer a plea for fairness. It was a declaration of intent. In the shadow of the Concorde's indifference, humanity began to move, not in anger, but with purpose. Factories hummed with renewed vigor. Fleets were refitted with cutting-edge technology, and whispers of alliances formed in places the Council would never suspect. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for centuries. They would not do so again. The first strike came without warning. A convoy of Micron warships, notorious for their raids on undefended systems, disintegrated in a blaze of light and fire near the edge of Terran space. The destruction was precise, surgical, a demonstration, not an escalation. The few survivors scattered among the wreckage reported an impossible sight: sleek vessels of Terran origin, faster and more heavily armed than anything the galaxy had seen. Humanity, it seemed, had been busy. In the heart of the Sol system, Admiral Elias Carter stood aboard the command deck of the TSS Resolute, humanity's newest dreadnought and the jewel of their rapidly evolving fleet. The vessel bristled with technology that, until recently, had been confined to theoretical models and black-budget projects. Carter's gaze was fixed on the tactical display, his expression unreadable as the Micron debris field blinked onto the holographic map. "Confirmation from the retrieval team," his tactical officer reported. "No survivors capable of providing actionable intelligence. Data cores from the enemy vessels are en route." "Good," Carter replied, his voice calm yet edged with steel. "And the message?" "Transmitted and received by all major factions. No interference reported." The message had been simple. Humanity would no longer tolerate violations of its sovereignty. The attack on Renaria 4 was their final warning. Carter knew the galaxy would view this as arrogance, perhaps even recklessness, but he also knew it didn't matter. The time for seeking approval had passed. Humanity's patience had expired, and the galaxy needed to understand that unequivocally. On the Concorde station, the message caused an uproar. Delegates shouted across the council chamber, their voices clashing in a cacophony of fear and indignation. Supreme Arbiter Corval called for order, his bioluminescent crest flickering in agitation, but the room paid him little heed. The Micron envoy, his segmented body quivering with rage, demanded immediate retaliation. "This cannot go unanswered," he bellowed, his voice reverberating through the chamber. "The humans have crossed a line. They have made themselves a threat to galactic stability." Linnea Voss, seated in her usual place, watched the chaos unfold with a quiet satisfaction. She had returned to the chamber not to seek approval or sway opinions, but to observe. The Council's arrogance, their dismissive certainty that humanity was incapable of true defiance, was unraveling before her eyes. It was almost poetic. Ambassador Voss, Corval's voice cut through the din, his crest now glowing a harsh orange. What do you have to say for your people's actions? Do you deny this act of aggression? Linnea rose slowly, her measured movements drawing the attention of the entire chamber. She took her time, letting the silence stretch before speaking. I deny nothing, she said, her tone even yet unyielding. Humanity warned you. We begged, we pleaded, we presented evidence. And you dismissed us. You ignored us. Now, you accuse us of aggression? No, Arbiter. This is defense. This is justice. The chamber erupted again, but Linnea remained unmoved. She had anticipated their reactions, their outrage. It was predictable. What mattered now was the outcome, not the noise. Back on Earth, the streets buzzed with a different kind of energy. Factories ran day and night, churning out ships and weapons that only a year ago had existed solely in prototypes. Scientists worked tirelessly, pushing the limits of human ingenuity. In hidden facilities, engineers perfected designs that combined human adaptability with the alien technology scavenged over decades. Humanity's newfound unity was a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Carter's fleet moved with calculated precision, striking key targets across the Micron hegemony. Supply lines were severed, outposts obliterated, and fleets dismantled before they could even mobilize. Each attack was accompanied by the same message: respect our sovereignty or face the consequences. Yet even as the Microns reeled, Carter knew this was only the beginning. Linnea's voice crackled through the private comm line on the Resolute. How long before the Council sends reinforcements? They won't, Carter replied, his tone matter-of-fact. Not yet, at least. They'll argue and posture, hoping the Microns can handle us on their own. They're too divided to act quickly. Still, we can't underestimate them. They'll come eventually. They'll come, Carter agreed, his gaze hardening. And we'll be ready. In the shadowed depths of the Resolute's war room, Carter convened with his senior officers. Holographic displays illuminated their faces as they reviewed the latest intel. The Microns were in disarray, their fleets scattered and their leaders scrambling for answers. Yet Carter's focus was on the larger picture, the inevitable moment when the Concord's forces would intervene. We're not just fighting the Microns, Carter said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of his officers. We're sending a message to the entire galaxy. This isn't about revenge. It's about survival, about respect. If we falter, if we show weakness, they'll crush us. The officers nodded, their expressions grim but resolute. They understood the stakes. This was no longer a skirmish over a single colony or even a single war. This was humanity's declaration of independence, their demand to be seen and treated as equals. On the edges of the galaxy, whispers began to spread. Stories of Terran ships that moved like phantoms, of weapons that could pierce the strongest shields, of a species that had spent centuries preparing for this moment. Some species watched with fear, others with admiration, and a few with quiet hope. For in humanity's defiance, they saw the seeds of change, a challenge to the stagnant hierarchy of the Concord. Back in the council chamber, Linnea delivered her final address before walking out, leaving the delegates stunned in her wake. Humanity is done waiting for permission to exist, done waiting for justice. You may call us a threat, but that's only because you know the truth. Your time of unchallenged dominance is over. She left the chamber in silence, her steps measured, her resolve unshaken. Behind her, the arguments continued, but she no longer cared. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for far too long. They would not make that mistake again. The path forward was uncertain, but Linnea knew one thing with absolute clarity. Humanity was no longer playing by the galaxy's rules. They were writing their own. The battle over the fractured moon of Cullis Prime was not humanity's largest engagement, but it was the most significant. It was here, in the shadows of the shattered celestial body, that the Concord's combined fleet made its move. 50 warships from a dozen species, bristling with weapons and shields designed to intimidate, emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. The galaxy had finally decided to remind humanity of its place. Admiral Elias Carter stood on the bridge of the TSS Resolute, his posture rigid as he surveyed the unfolding spectacle on the tactical display. The Concorde's fleet loomed, an impenetrable wall of firepower that dwarfed humanity's meager forces. Flanking the Resolute were 7 Terran warships, smaller and fewer in number than the Concorde's armada. But Carter didn't flinch. He had expected this. "Their weapons are hot," Commander Patel reported, her voice tense but steady. "No communications. They're here to end this." Carter nodded. "Then let's show them what they've underestimated." He turned to the communications officer. "Broadcast to the fleet." The officer complied, and Carter's voice echoed through the Terran ships. "This is it. They think they've won before the first shot is fired. Let's show them how wrong they are. No mercy. No surrender. Humanity stands today, or we fall forever. Make it count." Across the fleet, cheers erupted, but there was no time for ceremony. The Concorde's fleet surged forward, unleashing a barrage of energy beams and kinetic projectiles. The Resolute shuddered as its shields absorbed the first volley. "Return fire," Carter commanded. The response was immediate. Human warships darted into action, their movements impossibly quick for vessels of their size. Streams of plasma and railgun rounds lanced through the void, striking with pinpoint accuracy. The Concorde's formation wavered as 2 of their forward frigates erupted into fiery debris. The bridge crew of the Resolute erupted in cheers, but Carter's expression remained unchanged. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They haven't seen our real strength yet." The real strength came moments later, as the Resolute's advanced AI systems coordinated a counteroffensive that left the Concorde forces scrambling. Years of development had culminated in a neural network capable of processing battlefield data faster than any organic mind. Terran ships moved as one, exploiting weaknesses before the enemy even realized they existed. A Concorde battleship tried to flank, only to be ambushed by cloaked Terran destroyers lying in wait. On the Concorde's flagship, Supreme Arbiter Corval watched the battle unfold with growing unease. What had been expected to be a decisive show of force was rapidly turning into a quagmire. Reports of human ingenuity and adaptability had always been dismissed as exaggerations. But now, watching his fleet disintegrate under the relentless precision of the Terrans, Corval realized they had made a grave error. "Pull back the second wave," Corval ordered, his crest dimming. "Regroup and prepare for a concentrated strike." "Arbiter," one of his officers said nervously, "we're losing ground faster than anticipated. Their tactics are unprecedented." Corval's claws dug into the armrests of his chair. For centuries, the Concorde had ruled with impunity, their dominance unquestioned. The thought that this fledgling species could challenge them was inconceivable. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. Back on the Resolute, Linnea Voss stood in the war room, watching the battle unfold on the holographic display. Though not a soldier, her presence had been requested by Carter himself. She understood the stakes as well as any admiral, perhaps better. This battle wasn't just about territory or vengeance. It was about proving humanity's worth. "They're falling back," Linnea observed, her sharp eyes scanning the shifting formations. "They're regrouping for a counteroffensive." Carter's voice came through the comms. "Let them. It won't matter." He wasn't wrong. The next phase of humanity's strategy unfolded as the Resolute unleashed its trump card, a gravitational weapon capable of temporarily destabilizing enemy shields. The Concorde ships, reliant on their advanced shielding systems, suddenly found themselves vulnerable. One by one, they fell, their hulls torn apart by Terran firepower. On the ground of Khalees Prime's primary moon, the remnants of a Concorde ground force attempted to hold a key outpost. Human Marines, clad in adaptive combat armor, advanced with relentless precision. Their tactics were a masterclass in efficiency, combining raw firepower with strategic ingenuity. The Concorde soldiers, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies, were overwhelmed themselves. By the time the battle ended, the Concorde fleet was in full retreat. What few ships remained limped away, their commanders too stunned to process their defeat. The humans did not pursue. They didn't need to. The message had been sent, loud and clear. In the aftermath, the Resolute's bridge was filled with a rare moment of quiet. The battle was over, but its significance was just beginning to sink in. Carter stood at the observation window, staring out at the debris field that marked humanity's first true victory against the Concorde. "They'll come back," Linnea said, stepping up beside him. Her voice was calm, but her words carried the weight of truth. "They won't let this go unanswered." "I know," Carter replied, his tone equally steady. "But now they'll think twice. They'll know we're not the easy target they thought we were." Linnea glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "And if they don't?" Carter's gaze didn't waver from the stars. "Then we'll remind them, again and again until they have no choice." Far away, on planets across the galaxy, stories of the battle began to spread. The images of Terran ships carving through the mighty Concorde fleet, of human marines taking ground where no one else could, became legends overnight. For some species, it was a warning. For others, an inspiration. And for humanity, it was the beginning of a new chapter. No species would ever forget the moment when humans finally lost their patience.